Recording has started. There we go. All right. Well, good evening, everyone, wherever you are, near and far. Do we have anybody outside Atlanta? Let me know or put it in the chat window. Anybody who's not local in Atlanta? Georgia? Get people from far away. Never know. All right. Mexico. Got Mexico. All right. Kylan. And we've got Calhoun. There we go. Sprint. Calhoun, Georgia. That's not far away. I know, I came twice, right, Brent? It's still within manageable distance, but thank you so much. My name is Teo Lachev, your fearless leader for the past 12 years, actually. This meeting is our 12th year anniversary, started in 2010. My name is Teo Lachev, as I said, and I see some of the people that have been helping me with the group, and I'm sure some of them, more of them will join us. We've got John, we've got Shabnam, of course. It takes,
I'm here, Damo.
and Damo's here. Yep, it takes a village to actually get this group running. So thanks, for kudos to everyone who's been helping. So this is going to be our September 12th event. For those of you who are new to the group, which actually it's a good segue to the next slide right here. We typically meet on the first Monday of the month, except when it falls on a holiday like this one. So our official site is on Meetup. If you go on, if you haven't discovered it yet, if you go to Meetup and search for Atlanta Microsoft Business Intelligence users, that's the site. We also on the Microsoft provided community website, but this is our main one, so register. You're going to get notification. Our meetings are complimentary. We'd love you to attend. And if you get business value out of this meeting, spread the word, let your coworkers know. The more, the better. And I'm pretty sure that this question is going to come up. It's one of the most common questions. In fact, what I'm going to do in the chat window, I'm going to put this link because I'm sure that someone will ask for it. But if you wonder where our recordings are, there's the link right there. That's going to bring you to YouTube. And this is where you're going to find all the recordings since we became virtual. Speaking of virtual, I know some of you, or most of you, I guess, hopefully, want to get back in person. I haven't heard anything from Microsoft. There were some optimistic signs that they will open the office in Alpharetta for group meetings. But the last thing I heard from them was that they still don't allow groups. And to aggravate the things even further, we lost our blue badge. So we got to find somebody to sponsor us. So it's going to take probably a few. Meanwhile, I'll check and see what the situation is. But for the time being, we are virtual as we could be. If you want to get involved, if you have feedback, love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for improvement, please share, especially if you're willing to help implementing this. If you want to present, always looking for good presenters. So there's a plenty of opportunity for everybody kind of to chime in, kind of contribute to make this group a better place. On the subject of jobs, this is where I would like to kind of give the opportunity. I got in the habit of doing this every meeting. If somebody has any opportunities, somebody is looking for Microsoft BI talent, Power BI and beyond, please let us know. Now it's the time. You can unmute yourself, announce it, or put it in the chat window if you don't want to announce it. Anybody has any job openings? Anything to share? Anybody looking for talent? All right, looks like don't. So keep on going. All right, so as usual, I'm going to go through a few intro slides, as I said, kind of to set up the tone, to see what's new around Microsoft BI. And the first thing that I want to talk about here is some events that are coming up, I find useful. Microsoft Power Platform Conference. So Power BI, as you may know, it's a part of kind of a umbrella overall vision that Microsoft has, which they call it Power Platform. Besides Power BI, other tools in the Power Platform are Dynamics, Power Automate, Power Apps, and something called virtual agents that allows you to implement smart bots and stuff like that. So all of that stuff basically is the Power Platform. And we have a conference for it coming up next week, September 18 till 23. I think the first couple of days is going to be workshops, and then the actual conference is going to be like 3 days. This is a paid event, so make sure you check it out. Then Data Saturday, used to be called SQL Saturday, is coming back to Atlanta. Thanks for Shabnam to let me know. Now, is this event going to be in person, Shabnam, or virtual, or do you?
Just in person.
Just in person. All right, no virtualization. So this is an in-person event, October 1st, free event for the community, always a great thing. Always a good event. So take a look at that link here, register, and come and get educated on a lot of not just BI, but everything, I guess, SQL Server as well.
Yeah, this is mainly SQL Server and Azure data. No Power BI sessions.
No BI?
No Power BI sessions.
No Power BI.
Yeah.
So we're kind of discriminating against Power BI down now, or
no. We are having a separate one in.
They're trying not to compete.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. So this is going to be just SQL BI, but not Power BI. All right, got it.
Coming up in February or March, so keep your things open. So.
February, March. That's where the Power BI is going to shine. Right now,
yes.
No Power BI. Power BI is going to be here in our group. All right, so the latest stuff since the last time we met, which was August 1st, I believe, last month. What else? Not much going on. I guess everybody's on vacation, having a good time. So not much stuff actually really happening, nothing earth-shattering, but a few things that caught my attention. So we have more features for Microsoft put more features in Power BI to justify migration from Azure Analysis Services. For those of you who don't know what Azure Analysis Service is, don't worry about it. This is for BI pros, implementing what we call organizational semantic models, for the lack of better fancy term. So that stuff we can implement with 3 SKUs right now. We can do SQL Server, we can do Azure Analysis, we can do Power BI. Power BI, as you can imagine, is difficult for Microsoft to manage all of these SKUs. So if you ask them, it should be in Power BI. And there are good reasons for you to be, good benefits to be there, always on the latest of greatest, because Power BI basically is powered by analysis services. All features work, so that's where Microsoft wants you to be. But before Power BI, for cloud deployments, we had something called Azure Analysis Services. So if I have, let's say I'm a developer, BI developer at my company, my boss kind of says, Theo, implement here a cube semantic model on top of our data warehouse. I'll implement it, and then if this is going to be a cloud deployment, I can push it to Azure Analysis Services. So Microsoft is adding more and more features to Power BI so you can move your organizational semantic models to Power BI. And this latest one was around security, permissions and stuff like that. But here's what I have to say about it. I mean, Power BI in my consulting engagements is my first destination. This is where I would like semantic model, self-service organizational to be. But there are a couple of things that still makes Azure Analysis Services something to consider. And the first one is cost. So as you know, Power BI, at least the premium, on the premium side of things, we started at $5,000 per month, right? So this is the lowest kind of barrier. And that gives you like 25 gigabytes of RAM, which for organizational semantic models, something that potentially can span many tables, a lot of data, it's highly inadequate. On the other hand, Azure Analysis Services give us much more capacity for lower price points. So for 5,000, actually I can get 100, I think, gigabytes of memory, right? So that is something that I consider a plus. And the next thing that came recently actually near and dear to my heart is the scalability portion of it. So imagine, so from a real life project for a financial company, they had like millions and millions of customers, and they were calculating like credit score and bunch of like 300 other variables. And they wanted every night to this batch to run. So in the morning, all customers actually have the latest data. So this is a massive queries going against analysis services that actually were running for hours. Not only for hours, but sometimes actually we have to parallelize it because there is just so much stuff. They wanted to calculate this as a different as of date. So essentially what we have to do is to send massive queries, many queries to analysis service in parallel. And one good feature about Azure Analysis Service is actually it can scale out very easily. You can actually automate this. You can kind of process your model, scale it out, and then you can hit up to 7 instances, 7 servers in a farm, basically Azure Analysis Service running in a farm. So that gives you a lot of throughput. We couldn't actually have met this requirement if that was Power BI or SQL Server, because it just can't scale. You know, it probably will run for days. But with this, if you want to have a really scalable thing, you know, if you want to scale to multiple instances, Azure Analysis Service actually is the only option. You can do it on-prem, but it's kind of difficult thing to do. You have to really configure it and all that. This Azure Analysis Service is just a slider. You tell how many instances you want, and good to go. So powerful stuff. All right, so we've got that. The next thing we've got is more Power BI Data Mart features. So you can check the latest announcement. Data Mart, for those of you who don't know what that is, so here is the deal. Power BI, it's self-service, most about self-service BI, empowering business analysts, right? So apparently Microsoft heard loud and clear that just slamming a data set on top of the data doesn't work very well in many cases. So they decided to, so I guess customers are asking for ability to stage that data into a relational database. So we've got that feature called Power BI Data Mart that came in, and it's a premium feature. Microsoft puts more and more attention to it, come with more and more features. Without kind of going too much off the tangent, I personally don't like it. That's why I'm not gonna cover all the latest features. You know, in my opinion, something that you have more control of, like your own database, probably will be a better option. I have a blog about this. If you want to check my opinion, you can check it. But we have that. So Power BI Data Mart is you're gonna hear more and more about this. The scenario again is you've got business user. They go to the online. They Power BI service, powerbi.com. They actually write some Power queries, also known as data flows. So now actually they can stage that data in Power BI Data Mart, which I think it's a little bit overkill to go for a data mart. While the only thing, in my opinion, that was needed is actually to enhance Power Query to save the data into a relational database. And it looks like some of this will be coming by the end of the year. So what I'm hearing is that Power Query might be enhanced to support destinations, ability to save to Azure Data Lake and stuff like that. And finally, we have not a big thing here, but for the lack of better news to put in here, conditional formatting on chart data labels. So that scenario is easy to understand, and but let's go ahead and demo it real quick. So imagine I've got a chart in here and I've got data labels. So we could format something conditionally, such as the title of the chart, the color of the bar of the chart. Now, actually, we can also format the data labels. And how we do that? Well, we do this by going to the format visual section in here, go to the data labels, and now what do we see? If we expand the values, we see FX button right here. So you see that FX button? That FX button tells us that actually we can plug in what? DAX measure in here. So all we need is a DAX measure that evaluates something. Actually, you can do conditional formatting using, kind of simple rules. But if you want to have something a little bit more complicated, you have to go into the DAX rabbit hole in here. So I already wrote a measure, and the most important thing here is the measure has to return text value, and that should be the hex value of the color or the name of the color. So I put in here some DAX formula that compares the a measure with 3 conditions, red, and it returns red, orange, and blank. So if you've got a measure like that, all you have to do is to go to FX, and this is the conditional formatting screen that you are probably familiar by now, because you can specify a gradient, you can specify simple rules, but also you can specify a measure. And that measure, let me see, FX. What fields we should base this on? We should base this on field value. Let's go and search for color. We said this is our measure. If the measure does not return text value, you won't be able to set it in here. So it has to return text value, which is the color. And once we do that, what do we get? We get our measure kind of evaluating for every data point, and voila, we've got conditional formatting using measures on chart data label. Cool. Got that. All right, so any questions about this? The latest Power BI features, anything that needs clarification or causes confusion? Guess no. All right, so we're going to keep on going. This meeting is going to be incremental refresh and hybrid tables, and Shabnam Watson is going to do it. And next meeting is going to be on October 3rd. We're going to talk about embedding reports, Power BI reports, such as for a third party. It's a very common scenario. You've got company, you work for your company, but also have partners, and your partners, you want them to see some embedded reports in a web application. Very popular scenario for ISVs. And Tom from Lucient actually is going to present. Any questions? I heard some noise. Does anybody want to say something? Nope. All right. Well, that's all from me. I'm gonna actually move myself quietly to the background, and if you've got any questions, we'll try to answer them. But meanwhile, I would like to invite Shabnam, who's going to be our main presenter tonight. As I said, she's going to be telling us about these exciting features that actually we only have in Power BI, like hybrid tables. Hey, Shabnam, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Theo, for having me. I've actually missed this meeting for quite some time now, so that was really good information you shared. It's amazing how quickly Power BI moves along and the features come. And I myself learn in these little short videos or presentations a lot better than longer ones. So that was really cool, the conditional formatting that you showed. Okay, so let me share my screen and then we'll get started. Good. Okay, so everyone, welcome. Today's session is going to be on incremental refresh and hybrid tables in Power BI. A little bit about myself first. Let me actually start this. There we go. So I am an independent BI consultant. I've been working on Microsoft data products for 20 plus years now. My focus has been on SQL Server analysis services for the most part, and then Power BI in the most recent years. And most recently, I'm working with Synapse Analytics, another data product from Microsoft. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. You can see me at different events in Atlanta and around the country. My contact information is on this page. If you want to get in touch with me, that would be great. And there's also a link to my blog where I have 2 posts about incremental refresh. I've collected the Q&As from the sessions into one of them specifically. So that's a great one to go and check out. And I wrote it as a reminder to myself, so I go there and I check. Go check that post out if you're interested. So today's session, we're going to talk about, at a very high level, we're going to talk about table storage modes and incremental refresh, and then hybrid tables. So that's kind of the flow that we're going to go. But before we get started, remember that hybrid tables are only available in the premium capacities or premium per user capacities. So if you're working with a pro license and you only have access to a shared capacity, you can still do the incremental refresh part, but the hybrid option is only limited to those 2 capacities. And it can be set up with or without incremental refresh. It's just that with incremental refresh, you can do it super easily from Power BI Desktop, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so Power BI Desktop is both a reporting tool and a modeling tool. So most of the time when you open up Power BI Desktop, you should be connecting to a data set that someone else has created, or for example, to an analysis services data set. This is actually good practice, trying to reuse what someone else in your organization may have already published. So in these scenarios, you are just using Power BI to create a report, you work on your visuals, but you are not actually modeling. And note that we're going to talk about DirectQuery. DirectQuery is not the same thing as Live Connect to a Power BI dataset or analysis services. On the other hand, you can also use Power BI Desktop as a modeling tool. So this is what you see in most of the demos that are out there, or most of the online guys. They all start with, let's get data from this Excel sheet, okay? So that's when you're using Power BI Desktop to create a model, a data set, and then publish it. This is where you get a chance to define the relationships between your tables and create your calculations. And this is where you can play with the table storage modes and incremental refresh. So keep this in mind. So today we're going to talk about the modeling part of it, not the visualization part. So there are several table storage modes. When you go to Power BI Desktop and you say get data, you have an option of how to store that data. You can choose from import, DirectQuery, or you can have a mix now. So the mix used to be composite models, but now it's called mixed mode. Composite models is now a little bit different. It's when you live connect to 2 different data sets. So the name changed a little bit there. But the good thing is that you can mix and match, right? And then we have dual. So I'm going to explain all of this in just a few moments. And then the newest addition to all of this is the hybrid table. So hybrid table is one table that's got 2 parts. One part is an import, the other part in DirectQuery. So in order to understand a hybrid table, you need to understand how each part works, and then you can understand how the whole works. Okay. So how do you choose between import and DirectQuery? Well, let's take a look at that. So when you choose import, let's say if your entire model is an import, that means every single table will be loaded in Power BI's memory, either on Power BI Desktop or in the service. Once you publish it, the data will physically move from your source system to the Power BI's memory. The good thing is that Power BI stores the data in a columnar memory-based storage system that's called Vertipack. It compresses column by column, so it keeps distinct values. And because of that, it's super efficient to answer analytical queries, like give me the list of products. So it can do that super quickly, like a cluster column store index. And everything at this point on, once you create your model, everything's being answered from Power BI's memory. Nothing's going to your backend. Opposite of this is DirectQuery. So DirectQuery in Power BI Desktop, you are just defining the relationships between your tables. The data does not move from your source system to Power BI. Power BI just knows how to create queries based off of your model. So here, when you define calculations, Power BI will transform them into SQL queries, sends the data back, and then brings the data to the visuals, and users can see the data. Okay, so how do you choose one versus the other? They have pros and cons. Import is best for most cases because of the Vertipack engine that's super efficient, super fast to answer queries. The downside to it is that you have to physically move the data. If you're dealing with tons and tons of data, that may take time. So that's something that you have to think about. And if you're dealing with a lot of data, moving all of that data can be slow. So refreshes can be slow. And there are cases where you won't even fit in the refresh window that Power BI service has. Opposite that is the DirectQuery. So DirectQuery, there's no data movement, which is great. So you're not paying for the processing time, but the downside is queries are going to the backend. And if you have a lot of data, those queries can be slow as well. The plus side for DirectQuery, and one of the use cases for DirectQuery, is if you have near real-time data. So if you have data that is frequently changing, then you can use DirectQuery if you want your users to see the latest and greatest data, if they cannot wait for the refresh windows. And then the other use case for DirectQuery is when your data set is so large that it's not going to fit in memory. Okay, so one of those two are typically the cases that people go with DirectQuery. Now, the good news is you don't have to choose import versus DirectQuery for your entire model anymore. Initially, that was the case. You had to be in either import or DirectQuery. But now you can create the mixed mode models. Let me see, we went one further. Okay, here we go. So in the mixed models, mixed mode models, you can choose per table. So as you bring in the tables, you can choose. So for example, in here, I'm showing you a very simple model from the AdventureWorks sample database, which you have probably seen this before. In this diagram, what I'm showing you is that internet sales and sales territory, those two tables, they are in DirectQuery, meaning that their data is not actually moving into Power BI. And we can say that, for example, the reason for that is that sales territory changes often throughout the day. So we want people to be able to see the latest data all the time. And let's say that internet sales is so big that it's not going to fit in Power BI's memory in your current capacity that you're working with, or it takes forever, right? One of those two reasons. So we have left those two tables in DirectQuery. Everything else we have brought into Power BI because we want people to be able to click on their slicers and filters and quickly get a list of products. And same thing with dates. Those don't change, so it's okay to import them maybe once a day. So this is a mixed mode model, which is great. And then depending on the queries that hit the model, Power BI knows where to answer them from. So it will either answer from memory or it will go to the backend. Now, if a query comes in and it asks for sales amount by sales territory, Power BI will send this to your backend, let's say to your SQL Server database, and SQL Server will figure out the results, sends it back to Power BI, which is great. But think about this other query. So what if you ask for sales amount by product? So product is in Power BI, internet sales is in your SQL Server table. Where does this join happen? Where does the join between internet sales and product happens? If you leave the model, as I'm showing you on the screen, that join will happen in Power BI's memory. So all of internet sales will move into Power BI's memory, and that's where the join is going to happen. Well, the problem with that is the reason we left internet sales in DirectQuery in this example was that it wouldn't fit or would take forever, right? So that's not a good idea. That's not going to be efficient. So instead, we can do a different modification to this to make it better. That's where the dual storage mode comes in. So instead of making product set of tables to be import, we set them to dual. What dual means is that Power BI knows that there is two versions of this table. One is in memory, one is in the backend, and it can choose which one to work with. So if you ask for product by internet sales, it will go to SQL and it will use the copy of the product in the SQL server. And then if you ask for something else, so if you ask for the list of products, it'll just stick in memory. So it will flip back and forth depending on the query. All right, so data refresh. So every time when you create a report in or create a data set in Power BI desktop, obviously you pull data once and then you publish it. And after that, your data doesn't change until there's either a manual refresh or a scheduled refresh from Power BI service. So when we talk about refresh, just know that automatically we're talking about the import. So DirectQuery doesn't have anything to move, right? So we're first going to talk about incremental refresh and its benefits, but incremental refresh by definition only applies to tables that are in import, okay? So when you have a table in SQL Server, for example, and you import that into Power BI service and you publish it to Power BI service, when you do a refresh, either manually or on a schedule, it will submit one query to your backend. It will pull all of the data. So data from your table will end up in one single partition on Power BI side. Now, with incremental refresh, what you can do is that you can choose what part of the data gets refreshed. So in the case of the fact internet sales, for example, we know that historical data is not going to change past 2021. All the records are sealed and closed, but this year's data will still change. So let's say that we are in March right now. So January, February, and March data is going to change. So for this, we don't want every time that we do a refresh from Power BI service to pull everything. We only want data for January, February, and March to refresh. And this is how we do it. So with the first refresh, everything moves because that's the first time when you're setting the base. Okay. After that, with the next refreshes, you will only update the data for January, February, and March. And so this is incremental refresh in a nutshell, the concept, right? Now, what's the benefit of this? The benefit of this is that you will have faster refreshes because you're only refreshing the recent data, so it's less data. The other potential benefit is that your entire load, meaning that your initial full process / refresh may go faster if your back end can handle multiple queries. And if you have your partitions done properly, then it is possible that your entire refresh goes faster versus one ginormous partition that's being loaded sequentially. Also, by definition, because the refreshes are faster, there is less chances of you running into network issues, resource issues, and things like that. And it will also reduce back-end pressure on your resources, same thing on your Power BI capacities, because you're dealing with less data, right? So in whole, it makes it possible to work with large data sets. Now, there are some things that you have to consider. One of the most important ones is that partitions have a where clause, right? I want the data for January, February, and March. You have to make sure that that where clause is actually being pushed back to your backend. A lot of times people can make a mistake, and the data is actually, all of data is moved to Power BI, and then that filtering is happening on the Power BI side. So we want that filtering to happen from the source system. That's called query folding. So you have to make sure that your queries that are submitted for each partition have the correct where clause in them. One of the ways that you can be sure, or fairly sure, that query folding is happening is that when you get data, instead of let's say you have a view, right? So instead of saying select A and B and C from view, instead of typing a custom query, you should be choosing the view as a whole. And because it's a view, you can control its column. So you're not doing a select star in the view, you are picking all those 3 columns. But by picking the view as a whole, it will help you guarantee query folding more likely. Okay. And then the where clauses of these partitions, so that they perform well in your backend, they should also be supported by indexes and statistics on the backend. Else, on the other side, you're not going to be efficient. And if you have too many partitions, so now if you go partition your data by day for the last 10 years, obviously that's going to hurt, because now you're submitting so many parallel queries to your backend. So in that case, your refresh is not going to be faster. So you have to pay attention to the number of partitions as well. Okay. If you are doing this you can do this from Power BI Desktop very easily. So you find your table, that's an import, you right click on it, it will bring up a dialog like I'm showing you. And then from there, you just choose, you enable it, and you will tell it how many years or months you want it to refresh. The first time, archive it, and then after that, which periods you wanted to refresh with the next refreshes. Now, the nice thing about this is that this one, Power BI will take care of the partitions for you. So if you tell it to archive the last 5 years of data, when you roll into the new year, it will automatically drop that last partition. It will create a new one. So for those of you who have worked with analysis services, this had to be done manually, or you had to write a custom program for it to take care of it. There was extra work that you had to do, but Power BI now takes care of it for you. So it's super easy and convenient if you can use the options that are out of the box. Okay. All right. So this was so far incremental refresh, right? So what are hybrid tables? So a hybrid table is one table that has 2 sections. This is not dual. Dual it's a table and there is 2 copies of it. One is in the backend and one is in Power BI's memory, and Power BI knows which one to use. Okay. Hybrid, which is the newest addition, is one table and it has 2 parts. One part is in import and one part is in DirectQuery. And so the typical use case for it is that your historical data that doesn't change often, you put that in import mode, and that will guarantee fast performance. And then the newer data that's still changing, you can put that in DirectQuery, or the section of it that you have near real-time changes coming in. And that way you can provide best of both worlds to your users. Now, let's take a look at a hybrid table when it refreshes. So with the first refresh, you will have all of the import partitions. You will have all of their data move into Power BI service. And let's say that in this case, March, we're still in March and March is changing. So we want to leave that in DirectQuery. March doesn't move because March is DirectQuery, right? So all the import ones move. And then with the next refreshes, you will only have January and February. So we are building on top of the incremental refresh. We're just adding one last part that is in DirectQuery. This is super easy to do from Power BI Desktop as well. There is an option at the bottom of the incremental refresh where you select and you say, get the latest data with DirectQuery. And then it says premium only, but if you have premium per user, if you actually upgrade your account, your pro account to a premium per user, you can have this feature there as well. The only downside with premium per user is that, as you may already know, everybody who accesses content from a premium per user must have the same kind of premium per user account. So that's a downside. So anytime you play with these options, there's a graph at the bottom that shows you what those periods are. So here it says this is the archive data, and then this is the incremental refresh section, and then you get the real-time, near real-time section, which is the DirectQuery part at the end. Okay. So going back to the same diagram that we had before, we talked about import and DirectQuery and dual, right? So the best practice is that all of the tables that connect to a hybrid table, they should be set to dual. That's because remember that the hybrid table has a section that is in DirectQuery. So by doing this, you will allow Power BI to send some of the sections of the query processing to the back end, for example, to the SQL Server, and let it use a copy of the tables back there to do its processing and then send the results back. Okay, and then the section that's import will use a copy of those tables that's in memory. So this is the best practice. Okay, so now let's go to demo, but I'm going to pause for a second. Are there any questions so far? Hopefully, everybody is following. Okay.
I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you. All right, so first of all, let me just show you real quick the data that I'm working with. I'm working with the copy of AdventureWorks database. What I've done is that I've created just a couple of views on top of the regular table and dimensions to clean up. So I'm just picking certain columns instead of everything. Same thing with dim date. I am only picking a few of the columns, okay? And this internet sales, I have played with the numbers and number of rows a little bit to have a little bit more data. So if I run this query, this will show me the sales amount by year. So I have data from 2014 to 2022, okay? So now let's go to Power BI Desktop and let me see. Open up my Power BI report. I'm going to start from one report that just has the basics, just the two tables in it, okay? Okay, and this one, here's my model, and the model is very simple. I just have the dim date and I have internet sales. Now the dim date here is, if I look at, so I'm under properties, and if I go down here under advanced, you see that it's set to dual. Now, if you start with an existing model, you won't be able to switch back to DirectQuery. So you have to be careful with the dimension tables. For example, if this were a dimension table and at this point I wanted to set it to dual, it wouldn't let me. So once you change something to import, you cannot go back, okay? But if you're in DirectQuery, you can change to dual, okay? So this one's an import and this one is in dual right now. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to transform data. actually before that. So let me show you all of the data. So you can see that here I have, let me do a refresh. And this is going to refresh the data that's going to pull from my SQL database. There's nothing here. There's no filters. There's nothing. Okay, so here's my data, and I have two grids here. One is filtering to September, and one is filtering to August of this year. All right. So one of the first things you can do when you're working with Power BI data is to limit the amount of data you're working with, a bare minimum. Even if you don't want to set up incremental refresh or hybrid tables, it is best practice for you to limit what you're working with in Power BI Desktop, especially if you're working with millions and millions of rows. Every time you do refresh, it's going to take forever. So, and that is the foundation that's going to take us to incremental refresh. All right, so I'm going to go to transform data. All right, and here there's an option for managing the parameters. And I'm going to create two parameters so that I can use them to limit the amount of data that I'm working with in Power BI Desktop. Now, you can call them whatever name you choose. However, if you're going to use these for incremental refresh, there are reserved keywords that you need to use. So Power BI is going to look for these words, range start and range end. Okay. For the type, I'm going to choose date time. This has to match the type of the column that you are going to filter. So whatever that column type is, this must match. Okay. And I'm going to put this as 2018. And then click on new and create the other parameter, range end. And this time, again, date time. And for this one, I'm going to say 2023. Now, I go one day into the next year for this one. And for in Power BI Desktop, it doesn't matter. But later on, when we set up incremental refresh, it is important that you do not include both boundaries. Otherwise, your data for the first day of the year is going to show up in two partitions and you're going to duplicate it. Okay. So I'm going to set this one day forward. All right. So let's see. This is date time. And let's check this one, date time. There we go. All right. And now when I have two parameters. Okay. And I go back to fact internet sales, and I'm going to find order date. Okay. And I'm going to say date time filters, custom filter, and I'm going to filter my values here in the columns. So we're going to say we want rows that are after or equal to, and we can choose a parameter or a fixed value. We're going to choose range start and is before. So this is where if you make a mistake and choose the equal as well, your numbers will most likely be off later on. Okay, so parameters and range end. So we want everything that's equal or after to range start and before range end. Okay. I'm going to click on OK, and now you can see that it limited my data. So some of the rows for 2017 disappeared. Now I'm going to say close and apply, and this will refresh this data. So some of this data is going to go away. All right. So now if this was a real example, I would even limit it further in Power BI Desktop because I don't want to wait for Power BI Desktop to load a lot of data. Plus, I may not have enough memory on my machine to load a lot of the data. So this is a nice way, just parameters, right? And let me save this one as, I'm going to save this as demo1. And then I will publish this to Power BI Service, and then we'll go look at how these parameters look from Power BI Service. I'm going to go to refresh demos 3 and replace it because I've published this before. Earlier today, I was practicing. Okay, so while this is going, I'm going to bring my Power BI here from Power BI Service. So I am in refresh demos 3. You can see that I've upgraded to premium per user for one of my accounts, pro accounts. It lets you upgrade for 60 days at a time. And then if you can see here, there is a diamond with a little person next to it. This means that this is a Power BI premium per user workspace, okay? So going to refresh demos 1, you see that this is the one that just got published, all right? So let's go and take a look at its settings. And here, if I look at the parameters, you see that the same parameters showed up here, right? And from here, I can change the value. So in the desktop, I only work with limited data, but from here, I can change this to 2010 and apply. And now if I go to my data set and if I refresh it from Power BI service, Power BI is going to pull all of the data. Okay, so while it's doing that, I'm going to go to content and open this up. So this is the report. And when it opens up, sometimes it caches the report. So you may have to hit this refresh to pull the latest. So if I do refresh, I get all of the data. So this is just parameters, right? In Power BI Desktop, I limit with parameters. In Power BI Service, I can lift the parameters to load all of the data, okay? But it's still all one chunk, all right? So now let's go back to Power BI Desktop and make a small change. Let me actually close this other one. We'll get to this one later. Okay. All right, so back to Power BI Desktop, we have 2 parameters set up. Now we can go to the model. Okay, and on the table that's an import, we can go to incremental refresh. And this dialog is actually pretty useful by itself because it gives you a lot of information, gives you a lot of links that you can go and read more. So it's telling you that you can load faster, you can load tables faster with incremental refresh, okay? So this table's already selected and I slide this to the right and now this is a dialog. So I'm going to say, I want to only keep data for the last 5 years. And you see that this changes as you make selections up here. This section down here changes, okay? And then we want to incrementally refresh the last month. Now, the last month is the actual current month because we're in September and it picks September. It is not the last 30 days. This is entire periods, okay? And then same thing with years. So it's going to go from 2017 to 2022, end of August, okay? And then it's going to create that one month. However, as you're going to see in a minute, it actually, once it gets to 2022, it's going to be smart about how it's going to create the partitions, okay? And then this is the other feature down here, which is for hybrid, but we're not going to do this one yet, okay? So if you're working with a pro license and a shared capacity, not a premium capacity or premium per user capacity, you can do all this part, okay? It's just the direct query part that you cannot do, okay? And then there's a little diagram that will help you, all right? So I'm going to click on apply. Okay, so nothing changes from here. And actually, if you go to DAX, if you go to Tabular Editor and open up this one, I'm not going to do that right now. If you open it up and connect to it, you're going to see that there's only one partition. So we have defined for Power BI how to create the partitions in the service. They're never created in the desktop, all right? Go back to home and let's publish this one. So I'm going to save this as. Let's go to the next one. And then publish this to the same place. Refresh demos 3. And then we'll go and take a look at its settings from a couple of different places to understand what's going on. All right. So let's first go to Power BI. Go under the data sets. So this is demo 2, and it just got published. Let's take a look at its parameters. This time we have parameters, but we can no longer change them from Power BI service. This is because now the parameters are under the control of incremental refresh from Power BI service. So you can no longer change them from here. They are automatically rolling, right? Power BI, as it creates the partitions, it's going to change the parameters to beginning of the year, end of the year, and go forward. Okay, so I see 2 questions. Let me see. I'm going to pause here for a moment. So one question is, seems like Power BI Desktop has serious limitations when you use import mode, even though this mode is recommended. So how do you know how much data will fit into your memory? So it depends on it. So I don't know if that question was before the parameters or after the parameters. How much data? So you have to do a test. So if you're unsure, you have to do a test. So you can test with a little bit of data, and then you can lift your where clause and add to it to get an idea. Typically, it takes a lot of data to get to the limit on a desktop. So you have to be working with millions and millions of rows, right? And then there's a question from Teo. When you say in memory, do you mean when deployed to Power BI online?
I was trying to clarify. That was the same
Gotcha,
question.
gotcha. Yes.
So
yes,
that's what I was trying to
see.
understand what this person meant. Probably it's kind of when it's deployed to Power BI, and you're on the right track to answer it. I just wanted to make sure.
Gotcha. Yes. So in Power BI, in the Power BI service, there's limits, but those limits are really large. On the desktop, when you're working on your machine, you are limited to the memory that is on your machine. So you can you can do some tests to see how much data it takes for you to run out of memory. It's hard to figure out because it's not just the number of rows, it's also the cardinality and the number of columns. Okay, so you have to play around with the number of with the data also. The other thing that we won't get into it here because it's out of scope, but you have to follow best practices, right? So just because your model does not fit into memory, it doesn't mean that that's the only way to go. That's not a reason for you to switch to DirectQuery. You have to check and make sure you are not you've only brought in the data that you need. You are not using those auto date times. There's a ton of things you have to do. So when you have done everything possible to optimize your model, then you can consider DirectQuery if it's truly not fitting. Okay, but in the desktop you can control with parameters anyways, and that's a best practice. All right.
Yeah, and something to add on this is that, just bear in mind that this storage engine that Power BI Desktop uses kind of compresses the data. There is a very good compression going on depending on your data cardinality. So you really cannot tell by, let's say, the size of your original data set. Let's say if you look at SQL Server and you go to the properties and look at the storage of the table, you really can't tell if this is going to fit and how much memory it will take in Power BI, either on the desktop or on the service, until you import it, basically, right? And then you can just look at the, maybe Shabnam, you can show this in the task manager. You can see the Power BI desktop instance, and you can see how much memory it consumes. But you should expect 5:1, maybe 10:1 compression of the original data. So you really can fit a lot. And as Shabnam was saying, if you, let's say, and the desktop, by the way, is your development tool, so typically what I do for my projects, I use parameters so that I can work with a small subset when developing the solution. I just don't want to work with the hundreds of millions of rows. So I do parameters for, I filter large tables, I set those parameters, and then when I deploy to online, Then you do the, you kind of remove these parameters to import the whole data set. One thing also that I want to mention is that Power BI Premium actually, like a year ago, switched to something called capacity. What was it called? Power Premium Generation 2. Generation 2.
Right.
And that one really gives you a super large memory. I got to check what the limitation was per data set. So there's a lot of things that Shabnam was saying that you can do to work around these limitations. One thing you can do is to split, let's say you have a large model and that consists many fact tables. One thing you can do actually to split it into smaller models, because each one is of this data set is going to get a quota of, depending on your capacity. You know, let's say if you on P1, it's going to be 25 gigabytes. If you on premium per user, it's going to be 100 gigabytes. So each data set can get that quota, and that's going to be independent per data set. It's not cumulative across all the data set on that capacity. It's per data set. So there's a lot of things to talk about here.
Yeah. So one of the things is that splitting of date time columns. That's a big culprit too, to take those seconds off, reducing cardinality, all of that. But if you're really following the best practice, you should be able to get to a really good compression rate. Vertify compresses a lot. It's actually amazing. Okay, so going back, let me go back to Power BI. So I'm on my data set settings, and parameters we can't touch anymore. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this connection string now. If you are using a pro license and you're working with a shared capacity, the only downside is it will still create the partitions for you. It will do incremental refresh for you. You just can't see it. Okay, so that's kind of annoying. But if you're working with a premium or premium per user, you can actually get the connection string, and then you can use tools to take a look at what's happening. Okay, so what I did here was I picked analysis services, because analysis services is what runs Power BI in the back. And then I just put the connection string from Power BI service directly in here and hit connect. All right, so this connects to my workspace. And as you can see, each one of my data sets is an analysis services database. All right, so let's go and take a look at hybrid tables demo 2. This is the one that we just published. And we had defined a partitions for fact internet sales big. If we go take a look at here, we're going to see the partitions that it created. And for some reason, it has only created one partition, right? And this is by default. The first time when you publish from Power BI Desktop, even when you have defined a partitioning policy, it does not create those partitions for you. You need to have one refresh from Power BI service for it to apply the partitioning policy. Now, another tool that's great to take a look at these partitions is the Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor is a free tool that has a ton of different use cases. But for today, I just want to show you its ability for you to take a look at the partitions. All right. So similar to SQL Server Management Studio, if you connect, you can use that connection string, and then you can connect to the workspace, and then you will choose one of the data sets. All right. So I'm going to pick hybrid tables demo 2. And then we're going to take a look at its partition. So here it lists the partitions in Management Studio. You have to right click and say partitions. Each one have slightly different look to them. And here, if you click on it, you can actually see the query. Now, notice that for this partition, it's already using the range start and range end, but it's for everything right now. It hasn't generated those partitions. So let's go and do a refresh from here, and then it will create the partitions for us. All right, so I'm going to go on hybrid tables demo 2 and hit on refresh. And this is the first refresh right now after I published, and now it's going to pull everything into Power BI and create those partitions. All right, so we're going to go back here and I'm going to reopen this one again to get it to refresh for me. So demo 2. All right, and then now you can see that it created the partition. So it has created partitions for the last 5 years. And then we told it that we want to incrementally refresh the last month. So in order for it to get to September, it bundled Q1 and Q2 together, those months. So when it can, it will opt for larger partitions because they're more efficient. You don't want to have a ton of these partitions. And then once it gets to the last period, it will create the last partitions to the grain of what you chose. When you say last few days, you're going to see days. When you say months, you're going to see months. So it has created 3 months for us. All right. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to take a screenshot here of this one. So we want to take a look at this particular timestamp, right? So this is, and this, by the way, is UTC time. It's on my time. Okay, so now if I go back to the service and do a refresh, so this is the second refresh after the partitions are created. This should go super fast, faster than the previous one because we're only refreshing 1 month. And then it should only load data for this partition. Okay, so right now it says 1138, and let me reopen this one to get it to refresh. Okay, so 1138, and this is 1140. So from this point on, any refresh will only update this month. And then when we roll into a new month, what's going to happen is that Power BI is going to create the next month, and then it will combine these 3 months into a quarter. And then eventually it will roll them into a year, and then we'll drop off the earliest year and create a new year. So this is amazing. Again, if you had to do any of this stuff in analysis services, you know that it was a lot of maintenance to take care of this. But Power BI, with that simple interface, it takes care of it for you. Now, it's not, you don't have every control that you had with analysis services, but this works for a lot of projects. So the pro outweighs the cons a lot. Okay, so let me go back to Power BI. Okay, one more thing I wanted to show you guys. Let's do this one. So let me, from here, I will reconnect again to get this to refresh. Actually do a refresh from here. Tables. Okay, so now if I look at the partitions, you see that it has created the partitions. And another thing you can do also to troubleshoot is that you can do a create to, and this will show you the partitioning policy. You see this refresh policy. This corresponds to what you have in Power BI Desktop. So if you have a data set and you don't know what its refresh policy is because you don't have the Power BI Desktop file to take a look at anymore, for whatever reason, you can script this and you can see what's going on. So this is the 5 years, and then incremental, the granularity is month and 1. And then you can also see this query here. This is a query that it will use to create the partitions, right? And then if you go more down here, if we search for partitions, partition. Okay, here we go. And here you're going to see individual partitions too. What's the start, what's the end, and so on and so forth. And then the mode for each one of those partitions. All right. Okay. So let's go back to Power BI Desktop. All right. So far we have the incremental refresh. Now, for the next example, what we want to do is we want to set up that DirectQuery one so that we see how the hybrid table works. So I'm going to go to incremental refresh. And this time I'm going to keep the 5 years, but so that we can run a query and see how it updates, I'm going to change this to the last 7 days. Okay. So right now, 7 days. I was looking at this. Okay, here we go. So from January 1st, 2017 to September 5th is going to be imported once. And then the last 7 days from September 6th to today, they are going to be imported every time we submit a refresh, right? So we already did this with a slightly different example, but now look what happens if I check this one. So if I say get the latest data in real time, you see how this date changed? So it went from September 12th to September 11th. So when you choose the latest data with DirectQuery, whatever granularity you've picked here, it will change that one partition to DirectQuery, and then everything before will be import. Okay, so I'm gonna click on apply. All right, and then let me save this one as, I'm going to save this one as this one. So it's last 7 days, incremental refresh, and hybrid. And then publish again. Okay, and I'm going to open this in Power BI Desktop. Take a look at the, let me do a refresh here. Okay, so here we are, 7:45 my time. So this just got published. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to this one from Power BI, from the tabular editor. So let's click on this one. This one is the incremental refresh and with the hybrid option. All right. So going to tables again, there's only one partition here. And I'm going to refresh this one. This will pull all the data and it will generate all those partitions. Now, one of the things that if you're working with a large data set, now if you've noticed the first time when you publish it, there's still one partition and that's problematic. What people do is that they will publish with an empty clause to that. So they create the first partition and then they will take that clause off so that the partitions are, the rest of them are automatically created. But that's when you're dealing with a lot of data, you may have to do that. All right, so now the partitions are created. And let's go and take a look at the report. So this is the report. All right, same report that we saw in Power BI Desktop. Data from 2017 to 2022 is loaded here. And for September, we go to September 12th. Now, if I look at the partitions from here, let's take a look at, we have to refresh to get the actual partitions, and then we're going to take a look at the timestamps. That's why this tool is really nice for this purpose. Okay, so I go back to the table, go to the partitions, and this time, see, it created the 5 years, and then Q1 and Q2, July and August, because it can, it goes for the biggest possible partition that it can go to. And then from September, it created daily partitions, right? And then now, because we enabled that DirectQuery or get the latest data in DirectQuery, we have this last partition that its storage mode is in DirectQuery. So see, everything before is an import. This one is in DirectQuery. Okay, so this is, when you look at this one, you can tell that this is a hybrid table because we have this onward at the end of the partition name, and then here it says DirectQuery, right? So I'm going to take a screenshot of this timestamp. So 11, by the way, the day is about to change, and it'll be interesting if we're still here. You'll see that it will generate, it's going to roll forward in about 12 minutes if we do a refresh. Okay, so 11:46. So what we expect to happen is that we only expect data from the 5th and forward to be refreshed. Nothing before the 5th should be refreshed, okay? So now we go back to Power BI desktop, to service. Go to the data set and refresh this one. That should only refresh the last 6 days. And let's go here, do a refresh. Just making sure I open the right one. There we go. Okay, so this one is DirectQuery, obviously no change. This one is 11:49, which if I bring this one back, you see that was 3 minutes ago. All right, so this one got updated, this one got updated, updated, and from here, so from 5th and forward, it updated, but anything before has not been changed, okay? So this is a hybrid table, and the benefit is, again, because you only are updating a fraction of the data every time refreshes are happening, right? Now, there is a I can show you one example here with SQL. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go and update some of the data now in SQL for some of these days, and then we're going to see what happens in Power BI service. All right. So let's go back to Power BI service. And let's take a look at a report. All right, and I'm going to hit refresh so we know nothing's changing. So this refresh is only pulling from the data set, and September 12th is being submitted to the Azure SQL database right now, okay? So back to the SQL code, I'm going to update 3 days, September 12th, 11th, and 1st. All right, and then we're going to see with the refresh, with the page refresh, not a data set refresh, we're going to see what happens. Okay, so I have 3 update statements here, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to almost double the numbers for those 3 days. All right, so I'm going to multiply by 2.2. Same thing for September 11th and September 12th. All right, and now we're going to go to the Power BI service, and we're going to refresh. This refresh, we expect only this number to change because this row is the only one that is going to the backend Azure SQL database in this case. Okay, so let's hit refresh, fingers crossed, so that number updates. So for your near real-time data, what you can do is you can keep them in DirectQuery so that as the backend changes, every time someone refreshes a report, it will show up. Now, there is a setting in Power BI Desktop that's called automatic page refresh. You set it in Power BI Desktop so that every few seconds or minutes, it will force a page refresh, regardless of who opens it. And that way, if you have data that's constantly changing, people will look at the latest. There's also a setting on the service where your Power BI service admin can control. So if they set it to 5 minutes, you cannot set it less than 5 minutes. So they can set the maximum frequency for you. And you can use that to do a page refresh. All right, so this was just a page refresh, not a data set refresh. And then if I go here to the data set and do a data set refresh this time, this should be super fast because it's only doing 5 days. And let's go back to the report. I'm going to open up the report. Okay, so this report, when I open it up, it's sometimes Power BI does some caching. So right now it is cached. Okay, so look at the number for September 11. and the number for September 1st. Now I'm going to do a refresh, and this time you see that September 11 updated, but September 1st did not. So this is just showing you if you're testing your incremental refresh, making sure you have set the correct partitions. This is one way you can test it. And basically, this is incremental refresh on top of with the hybrid option. Super easy to set up and get going with this one. Okay. Let me see. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the slides now and talk about a couple of more things. All right, so hybrid tables are awesome if you have the use case for near real time. Otherwise, incremental refresh is amazing by itself, okay? Now, the hybrid tables have some limitations, and the reason, part of the reason is because remember that the hybrid table has two parts. It has an import part and it has a direct query. Well, direct query has its own limitations. If you have a model that's entirely in direct query, there are certain things that you cannot do compared to a model that's an import. So because of that, when you have hybrid tables, there's certain things that you cannot do, okay? So one of the things that you cannot do is you cannot add a calculated column, a DAX calculated column. So that's when you go under your table view when you're actually looking at the data, and then you go under column tools and you say you try to add a new column. It will tell you that you cannot add it because you're working with an incremental table that has incremental refresh policy enabled in hybrid mode. Okay, so this is one limitation. You cannot do this. So you have to create, if you have these calculated columns that you need to create, you should create them in your backend. Okay, that's one way. And then another limitation is that you have to be careful. Some of the Power Query transformations will break incremental refresh. So certain things you do will change the incremental refresh policy, and then you have to redeploy from scratch, right? It will change things. So you have to be careful about what you do. Also, you have to make sure that the query is foldable into your backend. Otherwise, when you go to set up the incremental refresh, you get a warning. It says it's not able to confirm, right? If it's foldable. Most cases, it's accurate. So if it says it's unable to confirm, go and check your query, the native query in Power Query. That's when you're in transform data, you right click and say, show me native query. If you cannot see it, chances are it won't be able to fold the where clauses back to the backend, okay? So this is another thing to keep in mind. And then there are some other limitations. So the hybrid tables, they're not recommended. If you have high cardinality columns, they may not perform well. If you're using a distinct count or min-max over string columns. Another limitation is that if you are planning to use aggregation tables, just know that hybrid tables cannot be an aggregation table themselves or have aggregations on top of them, because currently aggregation tables are only allowed if your table's in import mode. And the moment you have a hybrid table, it has a direct query part. So again, this is a limitation coming from direct query. Okay. So in summary, hybrid tables, you can get them in Power BI Premium or with a PPU. It's super easy to set up from Power BI Desktop. It will maintain the partitions for you. If you want to do custom partitioning, you can do it by using some of the tools. You can do custom scripting yourself. You do not have to use Power BI Desktop. However, Power BI, if you do it with Power BI Desktop, it will automatically take care of a lot of stuff for you. Now, the use case that I showed you is when your most recent data is in is changing, your historical data is not. So historical data and import, new data in DirectQuery. But there is an opposite use case where the old data, you don't care about it anymore. So you don't need to bring it into Power BI Desktop or Power BI service. You just have occasional users who go and want to see what that historical data was. So in this scenario, you would leave the historical data in the backend. You will only bring in newer data using import. So this is the opposite, the flip side of the example we were looking at. This one you cannot do from the GUI. This one you have to do it yourself with other tools. And then just the general, so just to summarize, the general use case for the hybrid tables is that it makes it possible for you to work with near real-time data while getting great performance from older data. Okay. I will share the slides. These are the resources if you want to look more into some of the options that I mentioned. And with that, if there are any questions, I can show you any examples you want to see. So Theo, back to you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank you, Shabnam. That was great. I don't see any questions in the chat window. Do you guys have any questions for Shabnam, what you've seen so far, or any Power BI related questions that we might be able to answer for, I guess, the remaining time? All right, got some ovations. Shabnam was great.
Thank you.
Very good job. Thank you for doing this for us. Any questions? Now is the time. All right. Well, I guess no questions from the audience. So let's stop here. Again, our next meeting is going to be October 3rd. Looking forward to seeing you guys there, one way or the other. And well, stay safe, stay healthy, and learn a lot. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.